And following on with our royal tombs and restless royal corpses and such like, this is Edward III. You're looking at a stylised portrait of him here, really painted quite some time after his death. Now, he isn't a restless royal corpse, but he is the father of a murdered restless royal corpse, King Richard II, but that'll be a story for another time, which we will get onto. The reason I want to highlight this tomb, which we will get to, is because in Westminster Abbey it is one of the most original, untouched and undamaged tombs. You're looking at a stylised portrait here of King Edward painted after his death. Like many of the medieval kings, portraiture was very rudimentary in those days, and there are no true lifelike portraits of them from that time. But here is an image of Edward from his own time, and he is noted as well for not being, he's a great warrior king, like his royal ancestor Edward I. Edward III here was also a great warrior king. He's also noted for being the inventor of the Knights of the Garter, so that came about in the reign of Edward III, and this is what you're seeing an image of here. Also seeing the old royal crown which was destroyed under Cromwell, so it's another nice little touch. This is the effigy that would have been placed on Edward's coffin when he was conveyed to his funeral, likely taken from a death mask as well, so it's the nearest we'll get to seeing the king's true face. All these effigies, they're a bit morbid and grim, but the faces of them were pretty much all made from death masks, and it's noted that it's puckered down on one side, which is another sign that it was probably very likely done from a death mask, because King Edward died of a stroke. This is his tomb. This is an old black and white photo, as you can see. Now, like with the other royal tombs, we view them from the north ambulatory, whereas to view the front side of it, I mean the north ambulatory really is the back side of it. To view the front side of it, you have to go into the chapel of St Edward Confessor, which isn't open to the public because it's a very sacred area. That's where the King and Queen disappeared off to recently in their coronation. When they go through the doors into that little private area, that's that. It's a very sacred area. You can go on a verger's tour there, but no photography and no filming and such like. So yeah, this is the front side of the tomb with the tomb effigy on top. And he has been one of the most important and in his time well loved by his own people, English kings. He has a canopy of a state, and this is the tomb effigy that lies on top, made from bronze and gilded. What once would have been even more brightly coloured, and you can see in the little niches down the side are angels. The pillow that Edward's head lays on was a replacement from Queen Victoria because the original went missing. Here's a close-up of the king's face, and this is possibly really what he likely would have looked like as an older man. A lot of the portraitures and whatnot that came after his death are based on this image, because a lot of the effigies, both on tombs and the ones that would have laid on coffins, were modelled on life, or rather the dead body of a king that had been alive, if you know what I mean. And this is the portrait of King Edward that hangs in St George's Chapel, Windsor, the home of the Knights of the Garter. And there you see is shown with the old orb as well, and the double-crowned sword. And he wears a circlet crown in this one that also went missing under the reign of Cromwell. And here you see his beloved wife, and it was another, like Edward I and his beloved wife, this one was another love story. I mean, Edward I and Queen Eleanor, that was a love story, and this one was a love story, which is fairly unusual for the time because most royal marriages were arranged, and theirs was. But Edward and Philippa loved each other, and as with Edward, there are no sort of lifelike portraits of Philippa. This is her tomb effigy, and it would have been taken from a death mask. You can even see the slight imprint of not being horrible, a chin strap that would have been put around the Queen's head to keep her mouth shut when she died. So yeah, that would have been taken from a death mask, and being that the face is slightly older and chubbier. So yeah, that's the nearest we'll get to see the face of Philippa of Hainault. But here's a nicer image of her from her time. Philippa of Hainault's coronation. All these little old images are taken from illuminated books and manuscripts from their own time. And here are their tomb effigies as they appear. They are buried in separate tombs, of course, but each tomb effigy is like this. And that leads us on to a little bit of the descriptive history of this king and queen. So go on to that part now. Pause to read the descriptions if you want, because it does fill you in on some of the interesting history of them and their tomb. If not, fast forward a little bit and you'll join me in Westminster Abbey at the tomb, because it is one of the best preserved and most original tombs in Westminster Abbey. So that's an interesting fact in itself. So on to the descriptive history now, then on to the Abbey after. And here you're looking at the tomb of King Edward III, and this is one of the more original and undestroyed tombs in the Abbey. King Edward III, he reigned from the 25th of January 1327 to the 21st of June 1377, and he was crowned in Westminster Abbey on the 1st of February 1327. His predecessor was King Edward II, and his successor is Richard II, who lays just there, the deposed king. But this king here, King Edward III, this tomb is very interesting because it is so original. These figures on the side here, you've got the king who's buried in this box thing here, in this stone coffin, and then on top is a effigy of himself, a metal effigy of the king. But round here, these figures are called weepers, and these are the king's children. Amongst these figures are, of course, Richard II and his other children, but also the Black Prince, who you see there at the first. He was and should have been the heir to this king, but the Black Prince died fairly young. So instead of him, you got King Richard II, who's not too good, I'm afraid. Yeah.
and they've got the heraldic devices, but this tomb would have been coloured, very richly coloured and gilded, and there would have been gemstones and semi-precious stones on there. But these are the king's heraldic devices. And these are the weepers. There were other figures on the tomb as well, but some of those were removed over antiquity. Some of the figures may well have been religious or saintly, so that could be why they were taken away. But we walk around the ambulatory looking at the tomb here, which is basically the back side of it, but the main side of these tombs faces in there. And these kings are all buried around the shrine of St. Edward the Confessor. So yeah, we've got a very original one here. King Edward III. And then his direct successor, King Richard II here, who, as we've discussed, made arrangements for the body of Edward I to be taken from its tomb in his reign, and the wax sheeting and stuff repaired and restored. So, yeah, very interesting. Right, hope you'll find that interesting. Thanks for watching.
And this is the tomb of King Richard II, successor to Edward III. Although he's Edward III's successor, he's not his son, it's his grandson. Edward III's successor should have been the Black Prince, but he died before his father. Like Edward I, Edward III was a very long-lived king in an age where most people didn't even reach their 60s, or especially nearing 70. So when the Black Prince died, who was the Prince of Wales as we think of it, although that term didn't exist back then, Richard II became the next heir and came to the throne after the death of his grandfather. Richard II is most noted for being the king during the Peasants' Revolt. He's also noted being the inventor of the pocket handkerchief in England, and the first king or noble person to ever use a fork in England. Both things he was mocked for and called ladylike and such like. He wasn't a great warrior king like his grandfather or his great-grandfather even, but he was by no means a coward. He was most disliked for his vanity, the gifts and things he showered down on his favourites, and the mess that he got the realm into, but the vanity was always particularly noted. And this is borne out in this image that you see here. If you've been watching the Restless Royal Corpses series, you'll remember from the one of Edward the Confessor, the image right in the middle is Edward the Confessor with that sapphire ring. So if you've already seen that, you'll recognise it. But this is the Wilton diptych. A diptych is a two-panelled, like a little book, but made from wood that opens up, that could be used as a devotional piece or part of an altarpiece or whatnot. Usually mobile or transportable, so they're quite small. But what really shocked and pissed people off at the time, and some thought it was vanity, which some laughed at, but some thought it was blasphemy, because the kneeling king on the floor here is shown with Jesus, then St. Edward the Confessor in the middle, and then over to the left is St. John the Baptist, and people thought that that was going a little bit too far, either on the vanity or the blasphemy link, so they didn't like that. But yeah, Richard II, as I say, he was his grandfather's heir, came to the throne, didn't do a particularly good job, and he was deposed in the end by the barons, like the parliament of their day. And along came Henry IV, Henry of Bolingbroke as he's known. And they imprisoned Richard, and they thought that would be the end of the problem, or hoped it would be, but people tried to rescue Richard and release him. So in the end they realised that he was either going to be a continual threat or had to be killed. So that's what they did. They starved him to death in Pontefract Castle, and he died there on the 14th of February 1400 in his 30s, so he was a young man, and a very nasty way to go. And then Henry the Fourth basically was on the throne then. He thought his time was safe and whatnot. He ended up dying of a very unpleasant illness, quite a slow and lingering illness towards the end of his life, and he blamed a lot of it upon the guilt or the sin of having killed a king. When Bolingbroke died, along came one of our most famous kings, which was Bolingbroke's son, King Henry V. Henry V felt guilty about what his father had done, and probably worried as well in a very superstitious age. Shit, what's what happened to my dad maybe happened to me. So what they did is they dug Richard II up and moved him from his original burial place, which you'll find out more about in the documentary when we go to it. And they moved him to Westminster Abbey 14 years after his original murder and death and burial. And he was given a lavish funeral and a lavish tomb and buried next to his wife, Anne of Bohemia. And probably in the hopes that his restless spirit might not curse anyone else, because they really did believe that kind of thing in those days. So yeah, this is Richard II, the grandson of King Edward III. And he'll be our next Restless Royal Corpse, and he's a murdered Restless Royal Corpse. So that documentary will be hitting the page at some point when I put it together, but he'll be our next one. So hope you found this one interesting, viewing the tomb of Edward III, which is, as I say, one of the most untouched and original ones in the Abbey, and the tomb of his murdered grandson, which lies next to him. So thanks for watching. If you did like, please give it a like and a share. That helps the page. Thanks very much for watching.